All right, this will be the last set of notes before you take your first test. We are splitting this first unit into two pieces, and the last thing we'll do before our first test, again, put the date on it. We actually have two sections we're doing. I'm going to call it 1.7 and 1.8 because we're going to be doing two things in this section. We are going to still be multiplying. Here, let me erase that. Basically, I suppose I should put it in a question format. How do I multiply? And what we call these in our book is they are called special cases. And there are basically two kinds, so we're going to have two different types that we're going to be multiplying. And the key to remember really is just remember FOIL, and I want to repeat what foiling stands for. FOIL is a process for multiplying a binomial by a binomial, where we do the first, then we do the outside, then we do the inside, and we do the last. So let's repeat how we work that over here. When I multiply just 2x plus 3 times x, let's just keep it easy, plus 4. I take my first terms and I multiply 2x times x, and I get 2x squared. I then go to my outside terms, which are the 2x and the 4. They're both on the outside of the polynomial, and I get an 8x for my outside terms. Then I go to the inside terms, which is a 3x. They're both squeezed on the inside, and I do 3 times x, which is 3x. And then I go to the last terms in the each polynomial, which is the 3 and the 4. I multiply them to get a 12. Almost always these are like terms and they combine. 8x's and 3x's give me 11x's. And I write it down and I'm done. So if we can FOIL, we can multiply what we call special cases. And there's two special cases that we're going to be working with. The first is going to look like this. It's going to have the same thing out front, the same thing in the back, and a pair of opposite signs. By the way, in higher levels of math, I'm going to give you some vocabulary over here. These are actually called conjugates. Kind of a weird word, but they're identical except for the link between them is opposite. And what happens when you multiply conjugates is it shortens the FOIL process if you recognize them. If you don't, it doesn't matter. You would just FOIL anyway. So we'll do this first one kind of the long way to show you what happens. If I were to FOIL this, I'd do x times x, which is x squared. I head to the outside and do minus 6 times x. I'd head to the inside and do positive 6 times x. And then I go to the lasts and get 6 times 6, which is a 36. 1 positive, 1 negative gives me a negative. You'll notice what happens here is that the O and the I combine to give me no x's. And I really just end up with firsts minus lasts. And this always happens when you multiply conjugates, that when you do FOIL, these always end up being opposites, and they combine to make 0, and we really just end up with firsts minus lasts. So if you spot a pair of conjugates, it can be really easy. Notice what I mean by that is the firsts are identical, the lasts are identical, but the link is different. And if you spot those, you can actually avoid doing the O and the I because they're going to cancel out. You can even see it here. Outside would be a minus 10x, inside would be a plus 10x, and they would go. So really, if I can spot a pair of these, I just do firsts. 2x times 2x is 4x squared minus lasts. 5 times 5 is 25. And it makes it really quick. But if you don't spot it, you would expand it all out and they'd cancel anyway. So it's just a little time saver if you recognize that special case. So what I'd like you to do is maybe just multiply quickly 3y minus 4 times, and then if I want it to be a pair of what we call conjugates, I would do 3y plus 4. And just go do that real quickly using the special case method. And you can pause the video and restart it. If I were to FOIL this, I'd write out all the terms, but what I would notice is on the outside I'd have a 12y, and on the inside I'd have a minus 12y. So if I notice that, I can save myself some time by just doing firsts and then minus lasts, and it's nice and quickly easy to multiply. So next up, and you probably need to flip your note sheet over, is the other special case is when you have a quantity squared. And what we're going to do with this is what we call expand it. So first thing I'd like you to do is write expand. To square something, like if I were to say what's 6 squared, you'd say it's 6 times 6. It's it times itself. So when I have x minus 6 squared, what that really means is I have an x minus 6 times another x minus 6. And once I expand it, then I'm going to FOIL it. And you'll notice I do not have a pair of conjugates here. O and I will not cancel because they're both going to be a minus. There's not a pair of opposite signs here. So I really do need to FOIL it on out. And I do x times x, which is x squared. I head to the outsides and do x times minus 6. I head to the insides and do minus 6 times x. And then I go to the lasts, and a negative times a negative gives me a positive. As usually happens when we FOIL, our O and our I combined, they're not going to cancel out because they're both negative. I end up way down at 12x's plus 36. So we've got two special cases. One where we almost have something times itself, but the signs are opposite. But really, you can really just FOIL all these and you're going to get the right answer. So one more, and then I think that'll be done. So my next example, I'm just going to do 3k squared plus 5 squared. First thing I need to do is expand it. All right, so when I expand it, what that means is I write it as it times itself. So I'm going to have a 3k squared plus 5 times another 3k squared plus 5. I now have a binomial times a binomial, and it's locked and loaded and ready to FOIL. So I multiply firsts. 3 times 3 gives me 9. K squared times k squared. I add those exponents for k to the 4th. That's my first terms. They are first in their polynomial. I then head to the outsides and I multiply 3k squared times 5, which gives me 15k squared. I then head to the inside and do 5 times 3k squared, which gives me another 15k squared. And then I head to the last and I make sure I multiply them and not add them. 5 times 5 is 25. Now I've got my like terms. 15 of those plus 15 more of those gives me 30 of those. So I have 9k to the 4th plus 30k squared plus 25. I put it in a box and I call it good. So for our special cases, really, the summary is one word. They're not so special. Sorry. They're really just cases of more FOILing. You gotta love to FOIL. All right, so you are now done with everything that we're going to do before our first test. So you need to grab worksheet 1718 once you show me these notes. It'll be bright gold, and once that's done, you can start getting ready to take your first test, and I'll tell you what that entails at another time. Have a good one.